This is Vermont Edition. I'm Michaela Lafrac. Over the past few days, I have been reading a lot of news stories about the flooding in Texas. And it's heartbreaking. I can barely finish any of the articles that I begin or watch a news story start to finish. More than 100 people are dead after flash floods swept through 6 different counties. I imagine that many of us in the Northeast can, in some small way at least, relate to the devastation that floodwaters can wreak. In a few days, we'll hit the anniversary of not one, but 2 big floods in Vermont. They were on July 10th and 11th, 2023 and 2024. Today on the show, we are going to spend some time looking back on the last 2 years, in which Vermont had 5 federal disaster declarations related to flooding. We'll also look to the future, as researchers and local officials try to help our cities and towns prepare for extreme weather events to come. We're going to start this hour with stories from our region's farmers, many of whom watched their fields flood or had to evacuate livestock. If you are a farmer or a farm worker who was affected by the flooding in the past 2 years, we would love to hear from you this hour. What's it been like trying to build your business back to what it once was and prepare for future extreme weather events? Give us a call and tell us about it. 800-639-2211 is our number. You can also send an email to vermontedition@vermontpublic.org. Now, before we dive in, I do want to highlight that the state of Vermont sends out emergency alerts, and you can sign up. The program is called VT Alert. You can tailor the alerts to specific locations, the type of alerts you want to receive, and the devices you want to receive them on. We'll have a link in today's show notes that will take you to that sign-up page for VT Alert. All right, we are joined now by Eric Skovsted. He and his wife own Joe's Brook Farm in Barnet, which is in the Northeast Kingdom. Eric, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, Michaela.
First, could you tell us a little bit about your farm? What do you grow? What does it look like? What are the views like there?
Sure. So Barnet is just immediately south of St. Johnsbury, and we are on the Passumpsic River and on the banks of Joe's Brook. We're a vegetable and strawberry farm, certified organic, growing anywhere from 10 to 12 acres of vegetable crops on any given year, and 3 acres of strawberries and 10 acres of cover crops.
How have the strawberries been this year?
It was a good strawberry season. It really was for us. Our acreage was reduced by the last year's flood, but the plants that made it through did great.
So, yes, tell us, you all were affected by the 2024 flooding. What happened?
We went under. We are in the floodplain. A lot of farmers farm in the floodplain for good reasons, and it was the big one for us. We've had numerous floods since we've started, including during Irene and even in 2023. But this one took about 95% of our crops.
Wow.
Our whole 10 acres went under, and that we had planted, and it was under for a very long time, which was significant for the strawberries. Just the whole Passumpsic watershed received a lot of rain, and that's what caused the river to go up for so high for so long.
Was there any salvaging of any of your crops, or was it all everything that was touched by the floodwaters
really
lost?
For food safety reasons, there's no salvaging of the crops. Something like strawberries, which are a 2-year system, weren't fruiting last year. That's one that we were able to save about half of, the ones that were underwater for the least amount of time.
You mentioned that many people choose to farm in a floodplain. There are very good reasons to do so. Could you explain why?
Yeah. So it's right. One of the vegetables are water. So when you're close to the water sources, it's easier to irrigate. The soils in the floodplains are a great mix of sort of loam and sand, sometimes some clays thrown in there in small amounts, and that can really be forgiving in terms of when you have a wet year. Um, and then like they can be large, flat parcels that actually haven't been developed because of flooding concerns. So you can really use some scale with equipment and achieve a scale and kind of grow food at a lower price per pound potentially. And just those are like I think the main reasons.
Yeah, so there's very good reason to be in a floodplain, but as with really any part of farming, it comes with inherent risk. Is there anything that you and your wife have done in the past year to mitigate as best you can future risk from flooding? Is that even possible?
I it's it's not. I mean, there are some things that we've done, but we still have a lot of crops that we're harvesting right now that are in the floodplain.
Mm,
And I mean, the trucks are coming out 2, 3 trucks a day full of vegetables from the floodplain right now. So my wife Mary and I, we sat down after last year and we tried to come up with some ideas. One was just to really look at leasing new land,
hmm,
and a lot of people came forward with land. Probably half a dozen people offered parcels of land, and none of them were met our requirements, would work for us for a variety of reasons. The one 2 acre piece that we ended up developing that's out of the floodplain, um, we're doing so. We're sort of it's kind of lukewarm enthusiasm because it's a distance to go. We've already picked 2 10-wheeler loads of stones out of there,
wow.
and we're still working at setting up the irrigation. So just for 2 additional acres. Um, it's quite a lot of expense for us.
Yeah.
And it's important to do. We are growing a crop of winter squash that the last 2 years we haven't had because it's flooded, and that won't be a problem this particular year. So
So,
that's one of the things.
oh, go
Yeah,
ahead.
I was going to say. I mean, other things we've done is just continue to try and grow over a really long season. So not. I mean, like through using high tunnels, focusing on crops that we can grow and harvest in May and June, and October and November, so that if we are affected peak season, like these July floods, that we have we still have a harvest
Yeah.
over the course of the year.
And you also were able to receive some funds from a GoFundMe that a friend of yours started for the farm, and I read that it far surpassed its initial goal of $50,000. What was your reaction to that money raised?
Yeah, that it was really kind of mind blowing. We didn't expect that at all. So the goal was when our friend Gretchen asked us if we wanted to set it up, we were thinking, well, we could use those funds to kind of bridge payroll until we can get replanted and keep our crew on because we have an awesome crew. And so it's crazy. I think about it a lot. Where I just on the GoFundMe, 712 people contributed to that GoFundMe. We're just really lucky to live kind of in Vermont, sort of where we sell to our neighbors. So people know us. We're very visible, but also to farm in this age of the internet. And I mean, farms have been flooding for since agriculture began, and it's sort of a unique place to have the support systems that exist in Vermont and that exist because of the internet now,
Yeah.
and because of the way we sell and market our crops, sort of direct to consumer. So that really allowed us to kind of continue moving forward with flood recovery and planning for the next season. It was critical. And so the GoFundMe was a piece of that. The NOFA Farm Emergency Fund was a piece of their recovery. The state's BGAP program, which is pretty unique, was a piece of our recovery. Um, and they're they're critical to why we decided to plant again this year.
Well, I want to bring one more voice into the conversation here. We have Bruce Hennessy calling in from Richmond. He runs Maple Wind Farm there. Bruce, thanks so much for calling into the show.
You're welcome. I appreciate the chance to contribute.
Yeah. So you've been at Maple Wind for more than 25 years now, and in 2023, your farm was hit hard by the flooding. You've a lot of poultry there. Can you tell us a little bit about what happened?
Sure. We did a tremendous amount of work. We knew that the storm was coming. We didn't really know how bad it was. It wasn't forecast as kind of an Irene event, which is kind of for us is kind of the standard of what a major flood is. When we were doing our work the previous day, we removed 4,000 birds out of our bottomland fields and moved them to a place that we thought was safe. Most of them were in a place that were safe, but then water rose even higher than predicted, much higher, about 8 feet higher than predicted by the flow forecast. And we ended up losing more birds, so about a total of about 500 turkeys and several thousand chickens as well.
I was talking just now with our other guest Eric about the ways that he and his wife have started working on ways to change up how they farm in ways that they have available to them to offset the risks of future flooding. Have you made any significant changes to your business?
Sure, major changes. The main field that floods is our bottomland field in Richmond, and that's about 30 acres. It represents a third of our primary production ground, and we decided to take that out of primary production after 2023. And that, really meant that it cuts our production by a third. We still use it a little bit, but only with animal groups that we know we can move very, very quickly. So in 2024, we had our flood relief plan. We didn't have animals down there. We still had significant losses to our fence and water systems and road systems to get down to that field and back out. And so we had significant loss there. So it was successful in that respect, but still needing to use that land somehow. So because our production dropped, we started partnering with other farms that kind of use the same methods and same production protocols that we do, and using them to fill the gaps that we wouldn't be able to do because we weren't able to produce as much ourselves. So we're selling partner farm products on top of our own, which we made a program called the Regenerative Network, which is where it really worked out well, and I think our community really appreciates the fact that we have those products available for them even when we can't grow them ourselves. And then we've also turned even further into that to stay alive as a business. We've created a store, which we've been doing for a number of years, but started adding in complementary products from many farm and food businesses around the state, and that's helped us bridge the gap as well. The interesting part, we wrote a whole big farm flood response plan after 2023, and the very first item on that list is never trust the forecast. And so the early warning system is great, but we were warned. We just had no clue about just how big the events would be.
Mm.
And I don't think that the forecasters know either. It's extremely difficult. And I'm not blaming them at all. I just know that it's extremely difficult to understand what it's going to mean at your particular site.
Right.
So we take whatever that forecast is and add 20 to 30% and go from there. So,
Bruce Hennessy, thank you so much for calling in and telling us about the work you're doing there at Maple Wind Farm. And I am crossing my fingers that you won't have to face any of these challenges this season.
I appreciate it. I should add that one thing is that we were pretty proud of ourselves that our flood response plan worked and we didn't lose any livestock during that time. A month later, during the tropical storm Debbie that came through, we had a microburst on our farm that took down our equipment barn, completely shattered it, to flatten it to the ground. And so you're not safe. Even if you're safe from floods, you're still not safe from some of the wind events around here. So it's been really interesting. And those kinds of hits, which for us have been six-figure losses, even with the tremendous support from NOFA and the state and other sources, we never quite are able to build back to where we were prior to those incidents. And I think that's something that people should understand, that each one of these events takes farms down further, and they never quite get back to where they can be, where they were previously.
That's a good point, Bruce, and one that I'd like our guest Eric Skovstad to respond to you. Do those words from Bruce hit home for you, Eric, even though you two are doing very different types of agricultural work?
Yeah, they definitely do. I mean, there's only it's the accumulated toll on just the infrastructure, on the capital of the business, and then on the farmers themselves, that kind of threatens the longevity of the farm with each event. That it adds to that sort of that burden. I think, try to be in the right mind frame, that this is not a unique problem, right? Like, you sometimes feel like a victim, but flooding happens everywhere. It's happened to farmers since time began, and that helps a little bit to just know that, if we have to do something else eventually, it's okay. We're not the only farmers who have had to sort of move on. We're not there yet. We've got a great plan. We're harvesting great crops. We've got a great crew this year, and we have wonderful customers. So we're gonna keep trying, and I think that's the thing that the GoFundMe, and the state support and the NOFA support really demonstrates is that, I mean, the community really wants all of us farmers to keep at it. There is a lot of value in that floodplain ground, and we're going to keep trying to realize it.
Yeah. Our caller Bruce just said that part of their plan for flooding includes the new mantra, never trust the forecast. Is that something you and your wife have had to adjust your expectations around too?
Yeah, I mean, it's great advice. I appreciate it being repeated. Yeah, there's like trusting the forecast, and then also being just overly optimistic, because there's a tendency to think maybe it'll be okay this time. Like my mom said last year, she said, "Well, you'll be good for a while now after 2 years of two floods in the last 2 years." And it's like, I don't think it works that way, Mom. It's like, it's not jury duty. You're not done with it for a while. There's the same 150, 1 in 100 chance of that level of flooding this year as there was last year.
Yeah.
And so it's just keeping it sort of along with not trusting the forecast, keeping that awareness sort of at the forefront.
Yeah. And lastly, Eric, you'd mentioned when we first began talking that you have a couple truckloads of produce a day leaving the farm, produce that was grown in the floodplain. Do you like breathe a little sigh of relief every time you pick a strawberry or pull another vegetable out of the ground that's ready to go, ready for sale, that was in an area that could flood quite easily? What does that feel like?
Yeah, I don't know if it's a sigh of relief, but I mean, farming is kind of like the appeal of it is making something beautiful.
Yeah.
Like farms are a huge part of Vermont's beauty and of the world's beauty, and how people interact with the world. And so to kind of like, there's that appreciation. Like, look, we did it again. I don't want to say it's not a sigh of relief like we got away with something, but it's just an appreciation for what we kind of were able to grow that day and harvest that day. And we don't know what will happen tomorrow. Honestly, we could use some rain.
Eric Skovstad owns Joe's Brook Farm in Barnet in the Northeast Kingdom. Eric, may you get all the right types of weather this season.
Thank you, Michaela, and thanks for having me on.
We also heard during this segment from Bruce Hennessy with Maple Wind Farm in Richmond. We have to take a quick break here, but coming up, stay with us because we're going to hear from a town leader in Barrie, which, as you might well know, was hard hit by the floods in 2023. And we would also love to hear your stories this hour as well. Perhaps you're still working to get funds that you were promised for flood recovery from your insurance or from the government. Or maybe you've been working on a construction project to make your house or your business more flood resilient for the future. Call in and tell us about it so we all can learn together. Our number is 800-639-2211. We'll take those calls in just a minute on Vermont Edition. Stay with us.
Thanks for listening to Vermont Edition, where support comes from Wendell's Furniture, home of wendellsdeals.com, offering furniture designed for a range of budgets, in stock and ready for summer. wendellsdeals.com. And Vermont Construction's Roofing Division, offering roof installation and repair with free estimates on asphalt and standing seam metal roofs. Now serving all of Vermont and northern New York. More at vtroofing.com.
Welcome back to Vermont Edition. I'm Michaela Lafrac. This hour, we are marking the anniversary of the 2023 and 2024 summer floods in Vermont. In the span of those 2 years, flooding affected every one of our 14 counties, caused more than $1 billion in damage, and qualified Vermont for 5 federal disaster declarations. Barrie in Washington County was one of the hardest hit places in July of 2023. Parts of the city were underwater again last July. We're joined now by the city manager, Nicholas Sturley Castro. Nicholas, welcome back to the show.
Hi, Michaela. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, we're glad to have you. And listeners, you might have heard me say at the top of this hour that we were also going to be joined by Johnson's village manager. He is unfortunately no longer able to join us. We would still love to hear from you, though. Maybe you live in Barrie or another part of central Vermont. As we mark the anniversary of the 2023 and 2024 floods, what's going through your mind? You can call in at 800-639-2211. Now, Nicholas, I want to focus our conversation on what Barrie went through with the flooding, but it is hard to separate this anniversary and this flood season in Vermont from what we're seeing go on in Texas right now and the devastating flooding that they have been experiencing. More than 100 lives have been lost, including many children. And as somebody who has tried to, lead a community through a major flooding event, I'm just wondering if maybe you could help us. I don't know. Just honor this moment and what is going on in Texas. What has it been like for you to be reading some of these stories?
Michaela, it's just absolutely heartbreaking. I felt, and I'm not alone in this, but a lot of people in Barrie and Vermont felt a lot of trauma from being hit in back-to-back years. That was really difficult. And I got to be honest that probably the greatest trauma I've felt through this process since the first flood in 23 was seeing those images in Texas. And it hit me not just as somebody who works in local government, it hit me as a father, hit me as someone who worked as a camp counselor, and seeing that devastation, it hits in a different way, having lived through it now. And one of the things that people have asked me in the past is, what was your reaction when this was going on in Barrie in 23? And I tell them that I was used to seeing those things on television, these events. It hits harder when it hit us in Barrie. And I know the owner of the hardware store. I know the person who lives in that particular house that got hit. And so now, even though I don't know any of these people in Texas, I understand what the relationships are like. I understand what my counterpart might be going through. So it's very, very difficult. And certainly for it to happen this time of year is, reopens those old wounds.
Yeah. One of the things that keeps sticking out to me from some of these news stories out of Texas is the few successes, but also major faults in emergency alert systems. It's something we've been trying to address here in Vermont too, on the local and statewide level. Since 2023, has Barrie made any changes to its communication or emergency alert capabilities?
Yes, this has been one of our top priorities. One of the things we did in last year's budget was fund a new notification system that's specific to Barrie. It's called Regroup. That's the name of the vendor. And what it does is it's similar to VT Alerts that you mentioned at the top of the show, but it's specific to Barrie. And it sends push notifications to people's phones. It sends notifications to their email. Our goal was to get right directly a message to the device that most people are addictively on for much of the day. And the easiest way to reach them is on that cell phone. And so many people have them now. It's a free app to download. It's free to use. The city pays the subscription. We've had over 900 people sign up for this. It's not specific to emergency communications. However, it certainly helps for that. We'll use it to announce road closures, for example, the opening of the pool, right? So it's not just a doom scroll on your phone. There's positive news that comes with it. But for emergencies, for near emergencies, it has come in very handy. Just last night, we used it to announce the closure of a bridge due to a fire, and so it's been a great tool for us to have. We're trying to constantly encourage people to sign up for it because, as I said, it gets you right where you're most likely to get that news, which is right on that device in your pocket.
I also wanted to ask you, Nicholas, about buyouts. These federal buyouts of homes have become this major focus of our country's flood mitigation strategy. They also can be complicated in a place like Vermont, where there is a housing shortage, and maybe you get money to, get rid of your house that's at a place that could get flooded, but then where do you move next? How many buyouts have happened in Barrie since 2023? Do you know?
Yeah, so we had 67 applicants for buyouts, and the city approved and agreed to move forward with 28. So that's left 39 people in limbo. And the challenge, so a buyout, essentially it's both the property owner and the city have to agree to move forward, right? So an application on its own is not good enough. if the city doesn't approve it, and the city cannot compel a property owner to buy out. It's both parties have to be willing and able to do it. Now, the reason the city has chosen not to recommend the 39 other buyouts is because there's a provision in FEMA's guidelines that say that a property that is bought out by FEMA, that parcel may never, ever be redeveloped again. And so in Barrie, the challenge of approving all of these buyouts is, we're only 4 square miles. Much of the flat land in Barrie is in either floodplain or the floodway, which is already difficult to build, or on ledge. And so we've had to be very judicious about the buyouts we chose to proceed with. And what we decided to do was to only pursue clusters along the rivers where we could create mitigation value for the city as a whole, right? So if your property was clustered with 3 or 4 of your neighbors and you all applied for a buyout and the city could create a place for floodwaters to rest there, that has value for the city. It has value for your neighbors. And so we felt that there was a compelling reason to take those properties off the tax roll forever.
So the decision there isn't just about whether the home is at risk of being flooded. It's what will the city do with that land next? Because you can't turn all of Barrie into a park.
Exactly. You can't, and there's places where we cannot divert floodwater to, right? And so there might have been an isolated home amongst several other houses that didn't apply for buyout where there's no mitigation value to the city, no mitigation value to that neighborhood because you can't really direct water to that parcel. So we, in that situation, the options are to elevate or to do a non-FEMA buyout where there are no restrictions on what can happen on the parcel. We know that we can safely, to some degree, redevelop on floodplain. It's happened. If you build to flood regulations, buildings in Barrie that are modern and to those standards didn't get impacted. So our decision really came down to can we create mitigation value to the city as a whole from this parcel, and if so, we pursued the buyout. If not, those folks are in limbo, and they're still, many of them still don't have a final pathway out of this recovery.
Nicholas, where did the money for rebuilding Barrie come from? Is it FEMA dollars? And have you received everything that you've been promised or allocated from the federal and state government?
Yeah, most of Barrie's recovery was funded by FEMA, and I'm speaking only on the public assistance side, so that's damage to city property, streets, et cetera. We had between both floods, we had about $4.6 million worth of public assistance damage. We've received about $3.5 million so far from total, and we still have some uncollected from FEMA, about $800,000 uncollected from FEMA, about $165,000 uncollected from the state. When all is said and done, Barrie will probably be out of pocket $250,000 if all these funds come through. The challenge, of course, has been we have to front all that money. So we've had to, FEMA is a reimbursement-based program, so we had to put that money up front and then follow the guidelines and then get reimbursed. So for the most part, it's worked out well for us. We've had our finance department take the lead on this, and they've been very diligent about making sure we're doing things right. We're doing the contracts correctly. We're doing the applications correctly. So when all is said and done, most of this recovery will be funded by FEMA and the state's share that they contribute.
Nicholas Sterling Castro is the Barrie City Manager. Nicholas, thank you so much for your time today and the work that you've been doing there in Barrie.
Thanks for having me, Kayla.
We have to take one more short break, but stick with us because when we come back, we are going to hear about research that's being done right now at the University of Vermont that could help us weather future storms. That's in just a minute. Stay with us. Welcome back to Vermont Edition. I'm Michaela Lafrac. If you're just joining us, we are marking the anniversaries of the 2023 and 2024 floods. 2 destructive floods hit Vermont exactly 1 year apart on July 10th and 11th. Those floods taught us a lot, and now researchers across the state are using what we learned from them and as far back as Tropical Storm Irene to address water-related challenges to come. Joining us now is Beverly Wemple, the director of the Water Resources Institute at the University of Vermont. She's also a professor of geography and geosciences. Beverly, welcome to Vermont Edition.
Thanks for having me, Michaela.
What is the Water Resources Institute? What do y'all do?
The Water Resources Institute is a fairly new entity at UVM. We are marking the end of our first year. We are a collection of about 60 faculty from across the university focused on water-related research and the translation of that research into operations or policy changes on the ground and in our communities, both in Vermont and across the nation.
So what does it mean to be a collection of faculty? Are you facilitating research? How does it work?
We are facilitating. Institutes at UVM sit across our academic units. So our academic units are the colleges that grant degrees and employ faculty. And institutes are a mechanism to bring people together across those academic units. So we convene researchers, we support researchers through funding initiatives, by looking for funding that supports their work and the training of their students. And we have our ear to the ground across the state and across the country for where is water research needed and how can it then be translated into action.
So you're celebrating your 1 year anniversary. Did the flooding last year and the year prior change the direction of the Institute or influence the direction of your work?
The flooding that we've seen in Vermont over the last 2 years has really inspired us about the importance of our work, but UVM's commitment to supporting water-related research really dates back several decades through funding that has been brought in to the university from the National Science Foundation and other supporters, and capacity that really got built up in large part after we experienced Tropical Storm Irene in Vermont, when the research community at UVM began to realize what a threat flooding was and how important it was to better understand flood dynamics, to bring research to action in addressing that challenge in the state and beyond.
Yeah. So you have a couple different projects that faculty members are working on together. One of them is focused on how people receive and respond to flood warnings, which we were talking about in our prior segments today, this new weather monitoring network. Could you tell us about that work?
Yes, those two things are actually separate initiatives, so I'm happy to talk about both. We have a collection of faculty on several different projects that are funded through a national consortium called the Cooperative Institute for Research to Operations in Hydrology. And those researchers are trying to understand how individuals and communities receive flood warnings, what the barriers to the dissemination of that information is, and how we can address those barriers both through communications means, like your last guest spoke about, and also by preparing messaging that's more accessible to a wide range of audiences.
What do you mean by more accessible?
The way weather warnings often work are in either text-based messages that are maybe not so readable to every individual, or using terminology like turn around, don't drown, that isn't always the warning that individuals need. So from a research perspective, we are trying to better understand how are those messages received and what are the barriers to understanding and receiving them.
Well, let's go to the phone lines here. We have a caller in Shelburne, and I'm curious if her thoughts relate to any of the research that you all are working on at the Water Resources Institute. Elizabeth in Shelburne, go ahead.
Hi, Michaela. Thank you so much for doing this story. It's critically important that information is getting out there, and it's actually amazing to be in the queue right after hearing from Bev Wemple. I lived in Richmond during the 2023 floods, July and then December, and in this little yellow house, which many people know about because it's truly ground zero in Richmond for flooding when the Winooski hits a certain flood stage. So our experience was pretty dramatic. I had a 2-year-old at the time. But what I wanted to highlight, and maybe Bev can touch on it, is, our experience in July. I learned to read flood gauges living there. And our experience in July was that the flood gauges were tracking pretty accurately to the forecast. Like what was happening was pretty close to what we were seeing on the flood gauge forecast. We could watch the water rising towards our home. But then in December, as I was watching these same flood gauges, after there was snow in the mountains, the forecast was radically different from what I saw coming to my house. And ended up calling a bunch of people as I was kind of freaking out, and was connected with Bev, who talked to me about the water on snow problem, which is that when we have these rain events in the winter, which aren't supposed to happen, which happen due to a warming climate, we have water coming down on top of snowpack, so it's very difficult to forecast. And so, exactly what your caller mentioned several calls ago, the forecast, never trust the forecast, because the accuracy is wildly off. So getting some more precision around these events is critically important for preparation, because the forecast said we weren't going to be flooded. And in fact, we had 6 feet of water fill our basement that December.
Wow. Well, Elizabeth, thank you so much for calling in. I'm so glad you and your family were safe, though I can't imagine what it was like to live through that flood event when it hit your town in Richmond. Bev, what are your thoughts hearing this call? It's amazing that you two had once connected to talk about these things.
Yes. Hi, Elizabeth. There's a lot there to her question. One thing I'll clarify for your readers is that in addition to the 2 flood events of July 2023 and 2024 that you're focusing on this show, that December of 2023 event was a different kind of event, because it was what we call a rain on snow event. And those are increasingly common in places like Vermont, where we have a seasonal snowpack. And in our winters that are becoming increasingly warmer, oftentimes instead of getting snow, we get rain. And those can cause really devastating floods, too. But the other part of Elizabeth's questions and comments really go to forecasting and monitoring. And that gets back to a question you asked me earlier about work that we're doing at the Water Resources Institute. We are working to build up, in partnership with the Leahy Institute for Rural Partnerships, a network across the state to improve our forecasting capacity. We have a vast portion of the state where radar systems that help us forecast storms don't see the rainfall that's coming in, and that makes forecasting especially challenging. So to go back to a comment that one of your earlier guests made, never trust the forecast, the challenge with forecasting in mountainous settings like Vermont is storms evolve very rapidly, and it's very difficult for modern technology to even measure what's coming. So at the Institute at UVM, through the research that we are trying to bring to the problem, we are also trying to improve monitoring so that we can improve forecasting of these
And
events.
that's a good distinction to make, because I think everybody here agrees that it's not the fault of, say, the meteorologists who are doing their best to predict these storms. It's a fault of
technological
technology.
challenge.
Yes. That's influenced by our geography.
It's a technology challenge. It's very much influenced by our geography, our terrain. But it's also a challenge that we are increasingly able to address through artificial intelligence. So a big piece of the work that we are doing at the Water Resources Institute through the capacity that our researchers bring is using new methods to improve forecast, to reduce what's called the latency time, the time period that it takes to take a storm forecast and turn it into a stream flow forecast. So bringing those new technologies to the problem to improve our forecast, not only here in the state, but across the nation.
I have so many more questions on that topic, but I do want to hit on a couple other areas of research covered by your institute. One of those is focused on wastewater systems and safe drinking water, and kind of building our ranks of wastewater professionals, folks who are really on the front lines of these floods that Vermont experienced in the last 2 years. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, I'm happy to. And folks not only that are on the front line of floods, but folks that are on the front lines of providing the drinking water and wastewater services that we rely on every single day. I'll say that at the University of Vermont, one of our key missions is to educate the next generation of problem solvers and workers in our state and beyond. And this partnership that we are developing with an organization in Vermont called the Vermont Rural Water Association is about increasing the visibility of the water workforce needs across the state, particularly work in drinking water and wastewater treatment plants, to get students out to those facilities to understand what that work looks like and to engage them with communities that need them to stay in Vermont, to come to Vermont, to work in our rural communities and to provide these critical services. So it goes beyond the flooding challenge to the water we need every single day.
Bev, over the past few months, we have seen significant cuts to federal funding that's affected research at universities all across the U.S., including at the University of Vermont. How exactly could federal funding cuts impact Vermont's work to better understand climate change and flooding?
Cuts in federal funding that support research are going to impact us all the way down to every person in the state. Research supports information flows to get forecasts out there. It supports the kind of resiliency planning that we do in our communities to keep our infrastructure and communities out of harm's way. And it helps educate our workforce of the future. We are working to address this challenge by diversifying our strategies. We need to ask our donor community to step up at the University of Vermont, our donors and alumni from across generations and across the country. And we're looking at innovative ways of doing the kind of work that we do in partnership with communities, engaging our students in that work.
I also noticed that the Big Beautiful Bill Act, which Congress is working on right now, it slashes NASA's budget for Earth sciences. Could this affect your work as well?
Absolutely. One of our researchers, our director of research at the Water Resources Institute, Keith Jennings, has a community citizen science grant through NASA that uses lay observers to understand during winter what the form of precipitation is. Is it falling as rain or is it falling as snow? NASA funded that work. Citizens are engaged in it, and it helps improve our models to predict what's coming and what's falling and turning into stream flow and floodwaters. So yes, cuts in NASA funding will affect us also and will play out in the kind of information communities can receive.
Well, let's not end this hour on funding cuts. I would love to hear about one more of the programs that researchers at UVM are working on that fall under the Water Resources Institute, perhaps something that we haven't yet brought up in the last minute or two that we have.
Sure. I'll invite your listeners also to come and look at our website, uvm.edu/water. I'm very hopeful about the future. We have amazing talent at the University of Vermont, and we have really rich relationships with communities across the state, and we value those relationships. And I am personally laser focused on educating the future generation of problem solvers. We have great talent, amazingly committed students who want to make change, and we're ready to take them in and shepherd them along and deliver them out to the state and the nation as problem solvers of the future.
I love that. Well, Beverly Wemple with the University of Vermont, thank you so much for joining us today and telling us about your work. It sounds like it is one of the many pieces of this tapestry of work that we're trying to do in Vermont to help keep this region safe from future extreme weather events.
Yeah, thanks for having me, and I enjoyed listening to your other guests, too.
Yes. And we would still love to hear your stories as we reflect on these 2023 and 2024 floods. The anniversary is just around the corner on July 10th and 11th. You can always email us at vermontedition@vermontpublic.org. We also have a number of reporters in our Vermont Public newsroom who are working on stories related to these anniversaries, and we can connect you with them at any time. Again, our email is vermontedition@vermontpublic.org. That is all the time that we have for Vermont Edition today. I do want to let you know before we go that on Thursday we have a really fun show coming up. If you need a little bit of break from the news, it is about jingles and some of those catchy earworm tunes that you probably grew up hearing. We're going to highlight some of the work of local jingle writers in our region. It's going to be a really fun show. So if there's one that comes to mind when I'm saying that, a phone number or a local business, you can email us about it too, and we'll try to highlight that in the show on Thursday. Today's show is directed by Aaliyah Papes. John Ahrens is our managing producer. producer. Andrea Lorian and Daniela Fierro are our producers. Our intern is Callie Canuxerl, and today's call screener was Rick Barrett. Our theme music is by Myra Flynn. I'm Michaela Lafrac. Thanks so much for listening, and we will catch up again soon.
These days, there's so much news, it can be hard to keep up with what it all means for you, your family, and your community. The Consider This podcast from NPR features our award-winning journalism. 6 days a week, we bring you a deep dive on a news story and provide the context and analysis that helps you make sense of the news. We get behind the headlines. We get to the truth. Listen to the Consider This podcast from NPR.